Vinaka, Namaste and welcome to Reset Fiji, a first of its kind brought to you by civil society, academia and the mainstream media. Reset Fiji seeks to provide a platform for robust discussions around ideas, innovations and solutions. I'm Stanley Simpson and I'm your host for today. The climate emergency coupled with the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed again, but perhaps more starkly than ever before, the fundamental flaws within our current economic system. The effects of the pandemic are already being felt in Fiji, with job losses, closure of businesses, food shortages, increasing mental health and anxiety, increasing violence against women and children, to name a few. We are seeing all of these issues and others on an almost daily basis. And it's likely that they'll become even more pronounced as the global economy slides into recession. But while there may be a general mood of despair, there is also hope. As the saying goes, every problem provides an opportunity. The opportunity to reflect and the time to reimagine Fiji. COVID-19 feels like a watershed moment in our collective experiences, and this may be an opportunity that offers us all the potential for deep and meaningful social change to reset Fiji's economy. With me today are 5 leaders in their respective fields: academics, pioneers of ideas, technocrats and thought leaders who will share with us what they believe Fiji can do and what they believe is possible for us in the future. Today's panel will focus on Fiji's economy and to consider the short-term, the medium-term and the long-term steps that could be taken to support and strengthen our economy. Our panel today: Professor Vijay Naidu, Fijian academic and Pacific development researcher; Savanathan Narumbe, former governor of the Reserve Bank of Fiji; Shashi Kiran, founder and CEO of the grassroots NGO Friend; Ram Bajakal, managing director of FMF Foods Limited. He's speaking here in his personal capacity. And Dr. Rohit Kishore, the acting dean of the College of Business at the Fiji National University. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Reset Fiji. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Professor Vijay Naidu to start us off with the series.
Thank you very much, Stanley. Very pleased to be here this morning. I come to economic development and the economic system from the standpoint of a holistic approach to development. And in the Fijian case, as elsewhere, in the current crisis, what you find is the huge importance of the role of the state, the role of the government in carrying out a whole range of activities in order not only to protect the economic well-being of the people of the country, but more widely, a whole range of issues there. But the role of the state has been reasserted as being very critical. And in relation to that, the regulatory framework that we have, the rules of the game under which the economic system thrives or doesn't thrive are very important. And in this regard, I come to the point of the economy of Fiji in relation to many other global South and Pacific Island countries' economy. And this has to do with a number of economic activities that sustain the economy. So in our case, our economy is very dependent on 1 or 2 commodities, 1 or 2 sectors, heavily dependent. So in our case, in the past it was the sugar sector, agriculture to a lesser extent, and increasingly since the 1970s, tourism has become the major source of our foreign exchange. Tourism has done very well, thankfully, and we have also become a remittance-dependent economy. And that has been very important, but COVID-19 has actually affected both these major sources of revenue. So I go back to the early 1970s following independence. The major goal of the development plans was, yes, boost tourism, but use tourism revenue to diversify the rest of the economy. And I think that business has not been completed. In fact, my view is, belatedly we are realizing it, we've gone back to agriculture, to the primary sector, to seek, some kind of growth there and diversification. So I think that's important. We have to think together collectively on how we can diversify the economy so we don't have, the situation proverbially called having too many eggs in the one basket. And so I would urge diversification of the economy. And the other two elements that I wanted to mention with regard to holistic development is that what has happened in the world today is that countries throughout the world have become more heavily reliant on their domestic markets. And although Fiji is a small economy, like many other small developing states, this small market is still important for many of the small, medium-sized, and big businesses in Fiji. And so the question here is, are we increasing the purchasing power in the local market so that people can buy, Fiji-made goods? And, in this regard, I want to posit some kind of universal income floor for all citizens of Fiji. In the case of our current government, they have done a number of things to support the most vulnerable. But I ask the question whether we can actually, extend this support, particularly to 2/3 of our economy, the informal sector. So I'd like to see that happen. And so diversification in this kind of universal support is important. And the final point I wanted to make was that clearly for long-term sustainable development, sustainable economic growth, you want to have an educated and well-trained labor force. And a labor force that is versatile as the labor market changes. And I ask the question, are we doing that? And final point is that we now realize who are the people who help us, who save us. These are the frontline workers. Health workers, doctors, nurses, support staff in the hospitals, people who work in the supermarkets, people who collect our garbage bag, not our normal stars, our soccer stars, our rugby stars, our actors. So we need to ensure that we treat them right, and that again is part of the extension of a diversified economy and social support. Nagawale.
Thank you very much, Professor Vijay Naidu, for those three pertinent points. I just wanted to ask, and maybe some of the panelists may also want to ask about your point on increasing the purchasing power in the local market. And you talked of having an income floor. Don't you think the government has done this in terms of trying to impose on the minimum wage, or more can be done to that? Or is that a step in the right direction? What is the practical things you're seeing to be done?
Thank you, Stanley. What I'm saying is what ILO, International Labour Organization, has been saying for a number of years. And as I was saying, that there has been some effort on the part of government, with appropriate policy support for financial support for the desperately poor and some of the people in the informal economy. But I asked the question whether they're sufficient. Yeah? So this is not the good times. When the good times begin to roll, this is something that government can look at. But I also make the point that I disagree with the current minimum wage. It's too low. And when people have small amounts of money, then they don't have the purchasing power. I know that the market forces, as the minister responsible has said, has ensured that people who have some degree of skill is not paid, the minimum wage of $2.60 or whatever an hour. They normally get $4 or $5 an hour. So the market forces have responded to some extent. But there is also a category of underpaid workers. And in this regard, and thanks for the opportunity to say this, they are about 30% of our people under the basic needs poverty line, by our own measurements. But when we have crises like this, they are another 25% who, then become extremely vulnerable. So the point here is that if they had savings, then they could have relied on their savings. But with the kind of low wages we get here, they are not able to save. And I have actually done a study in the tourism sector. This is granted a bit, in the early 2000 period. This is foreign-owned tourism sector resorts. And what we find there is that people were indeed paid more than the basic needs poverty line at that time. But their ability to save was very limited. And the kind of foods they were eating, contributed to NCDs. And so I think this is an area where, that poverty line, that 30%, the largest proportion is low-paid workers. They are not lazy, indolent people. These people who wake up in the morning, go to work, they might even be our garbage pickers. They might even be our security people. But they all were being paid below the basic needs poverty line, which means that they can't sustain their families well, and which means they can't save when we have crises like this.
Thank you for that, Professor Vijay Naidu. You're watching Reset Fiji, the first of a series targeting various sectors, various industries, various important components of life in Fiji and our economy. We will now turn to our second panelist. He needs no major introduction. Savanathan Narumbe, the former governor of the Reserve Bank of Fiji.
Thank you, Stanley. We all know, at least for us that are not in government, how serious this crisis is, isn't it? We all know that. But what I have been concerned in the last 3 months is the lack of dialogue on it. And I've expressed that very much in many ways that I can in generating this dialogue. So I'm extremely pleased that the donors, NGOs have come together to organize this one. I think we need to talk about it. We need to let government know what our thoughts are. It's their prerogative to take it or leave it. But to me, it's an important responsibility that I hold this government to account in these things. At least tell them what I think could be done to help us in this situation. So yeah, where are we? I think we're all familiar with that. I don't have to go into details of where are we in the economic status. But just to highlight a few, the jobs that are lost, or people that are working reduced hours or taking leave without pay. We know that. But I don't know whether we actually appreciate how many people are affected. In my calculation, It'd probably be more than 120,000 people, workers, that one day were working, funding the family needs. The next day, they're out of a job, or they're reduced income. And to me, that's about half of our working population. That's huge, extremely huge. Second, I think the companies, the businesses, and I'm glad we have a rep here from the business communities that are affected. Their cash flow has disappeared. They're struggling. And spare a thought for the small and micro enterprises. Spare a thought. Many of them will fall, and many of them will not rise again. I mean, that's critical. As you may know, a country or economy like us, 60% are driven by the informal sector. 60%. The big businesses that we all know about that are high profile, they generate only 40% of the economy. So it's important that we look after these small micro enterprises. Thirdly, the government is suffering. It's only going to collect about 30% of its taxes, its revenue. So they are squealing at a time like this, when the demands are so enormous and revenue is down by 70%. So, thirdly, I think we all know about GDP. To my calculation, I think we're looking at 10% decline in GDP in 1 year. 1 year only. And translate that to income. GDP and income are not entirely the same. So you go to income, the reduction is even higher. Why? Because our remittances are drying up from abroad. So to me, my calculation on gross national income is a big hole of about $2.5 billion in a year. So that's huge. And the bottom line to me is that, poverty, which a professor mentioned, is going to deepen. He mentioned 20% increase in poverty. So that means about 180,000 people dipping below the poverty line. That's huge. That's huge. And for us in Fiji, sometimes we do trivialize a lot of these things because we have a kind of social safety net of our villagers and so forth. I think the reality of the matter is that while traditional safety nets are there, sometimes only a few of us are able to take advantage of that. A few of us. So that's why that poverty thing at the end of it. So the suffering to me is immense. It's real. We perhaps don't see that in our everyday lives as we drive by. But I think if you go into homes, those are very serious people that are suffering. Okay? So that's the bottom line to me. The suffering immediately, and of course, the drop in income and poverty increasing. What can we do about it? What we can do about whatever situation we have, whether it's a household or business, it of course depends on, to me, two things. Firstly, how much money we have. Secondly, how high is our debt? And if you look at those two issues, how much money we have, it's virtually none right now. And you look at our debt situation, because of our fast exuberance of expenditures, our debt is already high. So, those two factors, we are already starting at a very fragile situation. But to me, Even in that fragile situation, the role of government is very important in such a crisis as this. We must do something. We must do something. And what is that? To me, if I can just mention very quickly, 3 things. The first is that what could we do immediately? You know, we talk about the structure of the economies and so forth. That takes time to address. We cannot address that immediately. I think the first thing we do is to ease the suffering of the people. That must be the first one. And secondly, the immediate issues that we have when we don't have income, don't have taxation that flows in is what? You look at your expenses. That's what you can control, expenses. Look at it very seriously as you have never looked at your expenses before. And that applies to government and I'm sure to us as well. Yeah. And the third in the immediate is look for additional revenue. It's hard at this time, but it must be there. Government must have additional sources of revenue. It's there. It's there. And thirdly, reset your debt. Take this opportunity in the world community now to reset our debt, international debt. So that to me is the immediate responses. What in the 12 months, next 12 months? I think firstly we must reset. I'm using reset a lot. The word reset in this context of our discussion, reset what I call our public financial management. Reset it. Because to me that created this mess before the crisis happened. Reset it. Look at strengthening the resilience of our public financial management, to be stronger, to face shocks similar to this. Reset it in that manner. That to me needs to be done in the next year, within the next year. And lastly, for the medium term to 1 to 2 years, we reset the economy. Reset the economy. Diversification has been mentioned. We must do that. Make our economy more resilient so we don't depend on only 1 or 2 commodities. And we should do that. Focus on the distribution of the benefits of growth. Focus to that. A lot more than what we are doing right now. Distribute the income or the benefits from growth more evenly. Narrow that diversity in income, disparity in income between the poor and the rich. Narrow that. And of course, reduce poverty. Those are my initial comments. Be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting points. We will keep moving on. Does anyone have, I'm willing to take any question. Anyone has a burning question, put your hands up. I'm willing to take it. Or someone from the panel wish to comment before they proceed. Otherwise, we will proceed to our next speaker. Get your questions ready. There's a lot of interesting points to digest there. I think the diversification part, diversification aspect is something both speakers have mentioned, and perhaps we will discuss what do we diversify to? What are the areas that we need to be looking at, and what else apart from diversification? Those are the questions that we want to ask when we talk about reset. And I'd like to, we've said reset, quite a range of people have said reset, and what does the reset really mean? I think that is what we're starting to say now. Of course, a reset needs to happen. And how do we go about doing it is what we're going to explore. I think Shashi Kiran has some ideas about reset. And over to you, Shashi.
Thank you, Stanley and Wulavinaka to all. Well, one of the things that I want to just speak on from what Governor said, former Governor said, was 120,000 people lost their jobs. If we multiply by 4 dependents or 3 dependents in the house, that's like 480,000 people out of 880,000 people living in Fiji. That's half your population without an income. And to add to that, the number of people on reduced hours, we are in a crisis. And I think we need to look at that in that context. First things first, when we started looking at how do people spend money, we realized, we actually work with people on what do you actually spend on your money on. 60% of shopping is largely on food items and largely processed food items. So the big items that we are buying are, of course, rice, flour, instant noodles, canned fish, mostly processed food, sugar, and all that. How do people afford that when that seems to have become the mainstay? So my call would be, let's look at what is on our shopping list and how do we actually diversify to replace this. When we're talking about flour, can we be making our own local root crop flours? And that's something we've been pushing for. Maize is an option for us to grow as a porridge for rice if there is not enough rice. Oil we can produce here. Sauces and Vitsen that's largely used, MSGs, can be replaced by herbs. Tin fish, we can do, there's already a lot of vesa we are seeing, Ika vesa, the smoked fish, but we can also be flaking fish and sun-drying it. So I think this is the time for us to relook at the traditional food preservation systems. We used to be able to preserve breadfruit without the use of freezers. There was drying. There was a lot of techniques, and it still exists. And that needs to come to forefront, and that needs to come into mainstream education for us to be able to have food for preservation, for natural disasters, but right now to replace a lot of that we think is a mainstay. Second thing that I would say is, we're having 120,000 people. If we are saying they're out of job, these are extremely high-skilled people. We have engineers, mechanics, technicians, chefs, people who've seen the world and have done amazing work for our economy. I think this is the time we need to give them space and time to be able to innovate. And we need to be humane the way we are treating them, instead of just thinking of them as unemployed. I would ask EFL, utilities, banks, let's just give people a break. This is not a space we're going to be in forever. We need to go soft. Loan sharks, which are already becoming quite a nightmare from what we are hearing. We need to go soft and allow these people some space to innovate. We need finances made available for these innovations to create new options in our economy, and I know we can do it. But how humanely are we willing to treat a very highly skilled force to allow them to take opportunities? Third thing I would say would be, the whole world economy will have to eat. And, you know, some of the countries we have been associating with, our exports are still going, and potentially there is bigger opportunities there. Looking at our niche marketing, and I would think about organic agriculture in particular, which can feed into the niche marketing. But let's look at our seafood industry, where most people are turning to right now. In 2015, $110 million worth of fisheries products were exported. Now, who is doing the exports? It's largely the foreign investors, very large companies. This is an industry where our local people should be able to see the opportunity, and how do we assist our local fisher people, fisher folks, to feed into an industry which could actually give them returns. The reality that we see is that there are big sharks coming and taking our fish away, but our small people, our people who are not able to use their own golingoli to feed their families. Many a times we see that the fish harvest that they are taking is actually taken away by fish wardens. And we need to rethink this. Seafood, our traditional people knew how to preserve and sustain our natural resources. And I think it's time that we need to rethink how these skills and traditions can be mainstreamed, and we look at that resource sustainably, and our local people can feed into that economy. I'll stop there, but I think there's a lot of opportunities right now that we need to be rethinking, resetting, and being able to ensure that our people don't fall below poverty line, like Professor said.
Some of those practices that you've just mentioned, can you maybe give an example, say, of the traditional practices that can be done now?
We have been running a lot of training, so of course we are doing food processing. So your breadfruit, your tapioca root crops can easily be simply grated and sun-dried and powdered to be made into flour. So that's an easy one. We are sun-drying fish. All the backyard gardens that are being done, what we see often is there's a lot of focus on low nutrient things like cabbages, which in drought probably we may struggle to replant. But there are a lot of sustainable varieties, long-term resilient varieties of traditional foods. Like for example, if we're planting eggplant, we're planting bele, we're planting rosella, moringa. Some of these things you put in the ground, they'll be there for a very long time to give you food. And they can be preserved. We largely look at solar technology and sun drying so that we are not spending a lot of money on freezing or storage. And that's something that we'll think that has the potential export market as well. Once enough of us started, say, drying fish, that could become a volume and a commodity for us to trade with within Fiji, within the Pacific Islands, or with the greater world.
Sorry, and I just want to touch the point, just to be clear on your point about EFL and the utilities. Are you recommending that they stop sending the bills, suspending the bills? So what is...
Well, there are a few things that can happen. One, if the government could subsidize, say, X amount of units for entire country for the next month or two. So we'll know, okay, we can turn our lights on till 10 p.m. So everybody has access and is thinking. If we are able to subsidize or give people a break for next 2 to 3 months while we reset our economy and see what sort of income people can come in, there's highly skilled people need a bit of break to be, yes, so let's stop sending the bills. I'm sure our economy should be able to absorb something like that to give people a break.
Thank you, Shashi. Perspective from the grassroots community group friend, and a lot of groundbreaking work being done from that end. Introducing now Ram Bajikal, Managing Director, FMF Foods. Obviously, you're speaking here in your personal capacity. Shashi mentioned some of your local products on flour and things. We'd like to hear your ideas and what you see as the way forward for Fiji.
Sure. Thank you, Stanley. Bulavinaka, everybody. I'd really, echo what I hear from the other panelists here, that the pain is real. And there is no denying of that. And I think much as we would like a magic wand to be swept and everything wished away, we've got to also recognize that that's not going to happen. I'd like to paraphrase something that I read, the Man Booker Prize winning author Arundhati Roy said in her article. And she said, the pandemic is a portal. And she said, every pandemic gives humans an opportunity to break from the past and imagine a world anew. And this pandemic is no different. So the opportunity really is, and this is the invitation, she says that it's a gateway when we move from this world to the next world that we can imagine. Are we going to walk through the portal or the gateway, dragging all the carcasses of our past with us, the avarice, the greed, the bad ideas, the disregard for climate, and all those sort of things? Or are we going to walk through lightly with just a few things in hand for the new world and be ready to fight for it? So I think this series here is a very timely one in terms of looking at what lies on the other side, or what should lie on the other side, or what can we create on the other side. And therefore, from that perspective, I think it's very important. Of course, it definitely needs to be segmented into the here and now, and the medium term and the long term. And right now, what is very obvious is what is needed is relief, and I think the earlier panelists have spoken about it. And then you start looking at what needs to be done in the longer term in terms of the structure. But I think what is important is these are not necessarily mutually exclusive things. You can do things in the here and now with a future in mind. And I can give you an example of which I happen to see, where instead of just handouts, I saw that the Ministry of Forestry was actually inviting people who had lost their jobs in the tourism sector to plant trees, and they were compensating them for that. Now, how innovative is that? You know, so it is in some way an immediate relief, not in some way, in every way it's an immediate relief, but it's with a future viewpoint. It's not just a handout that makes someone just take it and so how can we look at infrastructural projects that need attention, that are in backlog at the moment, and look at immediate relief being tied to those sort of activities where people can earn, but at the same time, the earning goes towards the creation, or the spend goes as an investment towards the future, be it in terms of infrastructure or whatever. The question also lies about what Professor Naidu said about reducing expenditure. Mr. Narumbe also said, how do you increase income, how do you reduce expenditure? And I think one of the things that everybody needs to do, and certainly businesses need to do, and I would dare say that the government needs to do that as well, is that we've got to have a startup mentality. We cannot afford the luxury of a bureaucracy at this point in time. We've done that in our organization. When we look at certain things, we just have short-circuited so many procedures because we don't have the luxury of time or the luxury to be able to afford the cost that bureaucracy inevitably builds to the layers of what needs to be done. And I think that's what you see in a startup organization. It's very lean, it's agile, and there is no unnecessary fat in there. And I think that's needed across the board if we are to reduce our expenditure as a country. But in terms of the structural things which are probably a bit more long-term, or if I were to look at another short-term thing which is in the immediate, just as people need relief right now, so do businesses. And I would believe that the small and medium enterprises need that even more than probably the larger ones. Not that the larger ones don't. Some of them are really in bad shape. But this relief, I think there is something that the government can do, and probably there are limitations to what can be done in terms of tax relief, subsidies, grants, tax deferrals, loans, whatever. But what can businesses do on their own? And when I'm looking at a lot of the businesses, and I'm looking at the tourism sector, which is so badly impacted, I also read the other day about the tourism sector saying, we will treat the locals just like we treat other guests, or there's a plea for that. That should never happen. I think that is something that is, if we come to that, it basically means that we are not catering to what we have in our base, and that is something that needs to be done. The COVID crisis, we've been through many crises before. I think the difference in this one is that it has, I don't know if there's a term, but it's a triple whammy. It's a triple whammy because it hits at the sectors of health, income, and education. It's a triple whammy there. So it's exposed these fault lines, and I'm not talking about Fiji necessarily, I'm talking about world over. It has hit these three fault lines and exposed them. But when you look on the other side, it has also magnified the kindness of human beings, the goodness in human beings, and has brought that to the fore. And you can see that in things like barter for a better Fiji. You can see people giving their services, getting things in return. You can see the generosity, the Velomani food bank initiative, and a number of private initiatives that are going on towards assisting. And I think these have come to the fore. So the opportunity is to use these structures, which are very strong in Fiji, to reset the economy. The question is, how much of it needs to be a reset? How much of it needs to be a rewind? Because we don't want to reset like you have an app or a phone in a thing, you reset to a factory default. It erases everything that you have custom programmed into it, and you don't want everything being erased. You want few things being erased. So I think our opportunity and challenge is, what do we reset? What do we rewind? And in terms of some of the things that I think Professor also mentioned, broad-basing the economy. While not losing the tourism dollars, how can we broad-base it a bit more into other sectors? Manufacturing, agriculture, very, very large, fisheries, forestry. What else can we do in that segment? And again, within tourism, how can we broad-base tourism into not just saying we will remain a premium destination, but actually segmenting it into different segments so that right from the backpackers to the most elite tourist feels that they're coming to a destination which is unique and which is good. And it can be managed. There are hotels that manage multiple brands. So you can manage that. And at the same time, into different segments like sports tourism, adventure tourism, health tourism, how can we do that? So when we are looking at resetting it, how do we do that in terms of changing what structures we have? But an important point is, I think Professor Raghuram Rajan, ex-chief economist of IMF, has written a book called The Third Pillar, how markets and the state have basically given the short shrift to community. Because I think community is what will stand us in good stead when the markets and the state are not able to support us. And as has been evident now in the case of Fiji, how community has stood by. But when we look at globalization and we look at economies and efficiencies, the community inevitably gets the short end of the stick. And I think that is another reset that we need to do. How do we involve community? Because when we involve the community, it's inclusive growth, it's inclusive development, and that's taking the economy to the community. And I'm talking about peripheral, rather than saying, if you want to be part of the economy, you have to come to the central hub, which is either the economic hub or the political hub, which is inevitably urban areas. And leaving out a whole lot of people who can actually build a very resilient economy if they were just allowed to carry out economic activity there. And one more, which is balancing between...
Can I get you to wind up your points?
Balancing between hyper-globalization and localization. I think we have to shorten our supply chains. That's something that we need to do. And greening of manufacture when we rebuild. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bajkal. That's quite a lot to go through and unpack there. I mean, very interesting points. I mean, plenty of things coming to mind. Time, obviously, is of the essence. Can we afford to rewind? Maybe some may ask that question. And we have quite a big population in the informal economy. You're talking about getting communities, putting them at the center, and getting them more involved in the formal economy. Would be interesting to see how you'd like to see that. Are you doing some of that as a company, as a head of the company? It will be interesting when we have the discussions to come to some of that. Our final panelist and our first responder who will be able to respond to everyone, privilege, Dr. Rohit Kishore, Acting Dean of the College of Business at the Fiji National University. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Stanley. Thank you for inviting me to talk on this. Just to begin, I mean, all the panelists here have said very important issues, raised important issues. This, as you know, is a worldwide pandemic, and it started with health crisis, into economic crisis, and now into financial crisis. And we, Fiji, I see it, as you're saying, resetting or moving forward. I see it as a recovery phase and a strategizing sort of phase, and then implementing and growing. I think recovery part we have done quite well in terms of, COVID-19, we now have 0 case and all, so at least we got that. Like you can see many countries are still not, haven't completed that phase. And now this is the strategizing phase that we are in today. We're having this dialogue. I see going forward in implementation, one of the key fiscal policies coming out, as we all know, is the budget which is coming out around the corner. Government so far, of course, the state is the leader and it's been leading in this case. In terms of relief packages, we all know that it has gone out together with FNPF and the government jointly. People got $1,000, those who laid off. And now the second phase of the relief is there, the $220 per fortnight, going for a while, for 2 months and then more. And in terms of businesses, banks are restructuring loans, so there's some relief for 6 months. And also there's a lifeline policy which has just been started by Reserve Bank. It's assisting small businesses and so forth. So all these things are put there, short measures, just to relieve people, because as you know, this thing has struck all around the world, and really it's nobody's fault, but everybody is in it, suffering it. Now going forward, really, I see the budget driving all this resetting and things. Like a lot of points being picked, some small points, those things will happen, of course. They're very, very important, will happen. But the main drive, what this budget should be, because that will be the main driver, the fiscal policy taking us out of it. We have done, as I've said, relief and everything is there. We know there's quite a significant debt in Fiji on our national debt, but that debt is around all over. You see other countries, they're hugely indebted too. What can we do? And I would like to see, this is going to be a big expenditure budget, I hope, and really stimulate economic growth, right? Not so much in terms of expenditure type thing, but investment type thing. I want to see this budget, a strategized budget, hitting where it matters really, putting money where mouth is, going right to which is the engine of growth? Business. Business sector is the engine of growth. If businesses grow, economy grows, and the flow-on effect is there on everybody. All employees, big and small, survive. Businesses are in crisis right now. They're not selling product. Simple. Business is very simple. If you can't sell your product, that's the end of it. You have to lay off staff, the first thing. And then you look at your profit margin. I would like to see money going into business sector where we are making revenue. Revenue export-driven budget, really getting into those sectors and assisting them to drive economic growth by, again, restarting their businesses and assisting them to do that, export-oriented. As soon as we start exporting, at the moment the borders are closed, so we can plan all this and have these things ready. Of course, we're looking forward that the borders will open this thing towards the end of the year, maybe early next year, when things will come into implementation. So that's what I would really want to see. Very strategized budget, hitting where it really matters, trying to start the economy, stimulate growth, and take it from that when the flow-in effect will come. Diversification of economy, yes, if you have seen a few years back, there was an article in Fiji Sun where I said diversification of the economy. That's well and good. Now reflecting on that, if you look at, we are an island nation. We should not forget our capacity, who we are, and what can we do. We have to be realistic, really, really realistic in approach. We cannot do everything, right? So the way we've been going, the way the economy has been giving, yes, two major contributors to our GDP has been tourism and remittance. Both are hit hard across, because remittance against our friends and relatives overseas have lost their job. So they're not remitting. Okay, when they will recover, they will remit. Tourism, I think Ram Bajkal has talked about it, and I have the same view. Premier destination, we have 5, 6-star resorts, too many of them. I would like to see 2, 3-star resorts coming around. I would like to see budget tourism coming around. And really, you see right now taxes and charges and everything are there. They will have to remain, otherwise government cannot function. And these things are all over the world, not only in Fiji. But I look at few margins of the businesses. Tourism sector is one. If you look at the margin on those people are making, and they're repatriating profit overseas, most of them. I would like to see some sort of regulation coming around there. And also, like if you go and buy a cup of coffee in Danarawan somewhere, my God, you don't have to charge that price. I would really like to see those people taking heed to this call and trying to look at their profit margin and bring it down, make it affordable. Right now, you look at GPH and other places, $199 breakfast and everything. Locals come, locals come. Why can't they do it every time? They keep their rooms empty. It's so expensive. If they make price competitive, even locals will come. And we will also be able to compete places like Bali and others. You know, see Bali and others, if you go there, those spots. So our pricing of tourism, I would like to see, come down really. That will help. And the other area, which is very, very important about restarting the economy, is the banks. I mean, you look, just reflect in your rear vision, you see the bank profiteering for a long, long time. And yet now in this pandemic, what are they doing? Restructuring of the loans. Restructuring of the loans is not going to help any businessman. It's only going to make matter hard for them after 6 months. It's restructured, loans are extended. If you're supposed to pay in 20 years, you'll be paying in 25, 30 years. Who's making more money? Banks, end of the day. I make a strong call here. I make a strong call on the banks to look at their interest rate and reduce real interest rate. Reserve Bank has taken action on that, reduce the overnight borrowing rate. And if you put your money in the bank, what do they give you? 0.5, 0.75, more or less nothing. Overnight borrowing rate has gone down. The deposit rate is going down, while lending rate has not gone down. Some of the banks have reduced 5%, but they increased 5%. I voiced that to the president of the Banking Association. Nobody listened. In 2018, beginning of 1918, they increased 5% on all retail commercial loans. That's what they have taken off. But if you the same banks, some of the same banks in other countries, if you look at their profit margin, I'm doing some sort of analysis in this area, I'll put out in paper. If you look at their profit margin, same banks overseas, without taking name, their profit margin is so more competitive compared to the profit margin they're making here. And you can look at their profit year in, year out, what sort of profit they're making while the rest are suffering. So I would like to see that happen. I would like to see tourism restructured and tourist prices looked into, very, very important. And then other things that I have is, those two probably. And the other thing in a bit of long term, what we want to see, like people have talked about expenditure. At FNU, right now, what we're doing, since I have taken a bit of a leadership position, we're trying to restructure all our courses, realigning courses to the industry, right? We're looking at our graduate attitudes, our outcomes, realigning with the competencies, what kind of competencies people are needing. I'm talking about professional skills gap that we have in this country. This is the long-term planning. We're having too many expatriates coming on too many higher salaries. We have to fill that gap. We have to fill that gap and to localize. Yep. So these are some of the points I'll make my contribution to really trying to restart the economy, stimulate it, and take it forward. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Dr. Rohit Kishore, for that perspective. I think we've had a well-rounded perspective, different points of views, some great ideas being put forward on various sectors, quite a lot. Before we get the audience to ask the question, I'll just ask any of the panelists if they wish to respond directly or to a point that they've heard from one of the fellow panelists, to clarify or to rebut or to create further discussion on the matter.
I liked Ram's comments. He sounded more scholarly than I did, as he quoted Raghuram Rajan and Arundhati Roy. Both of them were major, leaders in terms of thinking ahead and the current sort of situation. But what I particularly liked was this idea of reset and rewind. And in this context, one thing I forgot to mention was the importance of traditional Fijian values to inform us, and which builds social capital and gives us a sense of community, and the results of which we can see at the moment in terms of surviving at this time of crisis.
Let's examine, let's go, Shashi.
Can I quickly add to that? I think sometimes we have been undermining what our people have had. Our people have had strong food security before, which is a high risk right now. If we go to outer islands, you'll see how people are able to preserve green coconuts by doing lovo, and that's a drinking water. Seaweed, seafood, the way they have preserved. And that sort of knowledge has never been mainstream. So what Professor is saying, I think we need to relearn what the indigenous community had always offered us in terms of food security. And I just want to throw another issue in the mix of this economic crisis. Remember, Fiji has an NCD crisis. We have large numbers of disabilities. Fiji also has a crisis of malnutrition already. 45% of our people are malnourished. 80% of our children below the age of 2 are malnourished. 50% of our children below the age of 5 are malnourished. What does this crisis mean in terms of food security? And potentially it can be an opportunity if we're beginning to eat right and from our tradition, we may be actually fixing our malnutrition and NCD challenges as well. And while we're looking at income, let's not forget that there are lots of people who need other services like health, access to health services. So I just wanted to throw that in the mix before you ask further questions.
You spoke about this pain right now. There's a lot of pain. But what is keeping people alive at this time? What is the resilient aspect of the economy that we have that's keeping those who have lost their jobs, those who, who've been sent home? What's the resilient part that's keeping people going despite the pain at this time that you see?
Thanks. Yeah, you're right. There are a few factors there that in our culture as well as our country that may have some impact on that. The first, of course, is the FNPF. That's helping, but that'll run out. The second is that they may have a bit of savings. The Fijian culture savings is not very high, apart from the forced savings of FNPF. And third is just family support. That's keeping us, and that's very strong in Fiji.
So I'll open the floor now, and our first question, if you can stand up and introduce yourself and your question to the panel.
Thank you again to the panel for really stimulating conversations and dialogue. In terms of this reset series, it was important for us, sorry, I should have introduced myself, right? Shelley Nicole, I'm the Regional Director for Oxfam in the Pacific. And coming together with other CSOs, academia and mainstream media to put this series together, what was important was the critical conversations of reimagination, right? And that the notion of reset and the notion of rewind, if we continuously work in the same model, the same idea that we give currency to money, that's only one kind of economy. And that's what I want to put back to the panel, that there are other kinds of economies that exist in what we've been talking about. And currently, when we talk about economy, we tend to look at it from goods and services that are produced, right? That's the formal economy. Even though we have spoken about informal economy, we still think of inserting the informal economy into that formal economy where the gross domestic product is still measured by a certain ideology, what is valued. And so the big audacious idea that we want to put forward, and this is where the reimagination comes from, and that for the other series that are coming after this panel, after the economy panel, is around, can we start with the idea that we own resources as Pacific Islanders? We are not poor. How then would that reposition your ideas that you're putting forward? And I know Sashi and Ram have started us on that conversation. And here I want to build on the concept that is around the Velo money concept. When you think about Velo money, and I know the Mr. Narumbe spoke about that. It's family linkages that are keeping us alive. Velo money is caring for one another. Velo money is taking care of the environment. Velo money is actually saying, this is not all about me. This is about all of us. It is about stewardship. It is about custodianship. And that's what we want to bring into this conversation, is that how do we talk about the care economy that is invisible in plain sight? The GDP doesn't take that into account. So my question to the panel is, how would a care economy GDP be measured differently?
I think, Mr. Bajikal, that was to your point.
Thank you for that question. I'm not going to go into the metrics of how it's going to get measured, but I'd really like to talk about the community, really, where as the third pillar of society. And what traditionally happens is that with market forces allowed to play, most often uncontrolled, everyone's looking for efficiencies, everyone's looking for highest competitiveness, and that's how things go towards reducing jobs, offshoring of manufacture, going outside of the community, trying to buy things from outside, extending the supply chain, as I was saying. You buy things from China because you believe things in China are cheap. When you start looking within, when you start looking at the community, that last resort, really, when everything else is gone, I have my family, I have, outside of me, I have my family, the next is the community that I live in. Those are the basic bricks on which we live. And when we look at market forces and we look at optimizing, or not really optimizing, sometimes even maximizing, we tend to ignore what comes in or what remains as our foundation, and that's why we start looking elsewhere. If we roll that back and say, okay, looking at what has happened now, if I have to shorten my supply chain, if I have to start buying locally, where can I source it from? Where can I get, and mind you, when we're looking at broad-basing the economy, a Fiji manufacturing unit would never be competitive unless its raw materials can be sourced here. We will always remain vulnerable to other countries that make everything themselves. So we have to willy-nilly go back into the community and say, what can we do as a community? And I'm linking this to enterprise, and I'm linking it to business, because at the end of the day, that is the reality of the currency that we live by. And till we change that, I'm not sure how we can entirely change it. But that also calls for a dialogue by the governors with the governed in these communities into saying, hey, what are your real needs? And how can we look at taking, that's what I meant when I said we got to take the economy. When I say economy, I also mean the governance back to the communities and saying, what are your needs and how can we fulfill this? And I think that will be the start of moving into the kind of world that you're talking about. Thank you.
Before I take the next question, so any of the other panelists wish to, can the care economy swim alongside the formal economy, or will it get drowned out? Or is it just a social safety net, as many just see it now? 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it is there, but maybe in an implicit way, not so explicit, and that's what the point being raised. I think it's a very good point. But if you look at the government setting the policies, I mean, up to $30,000, there's a lot of relief from government in terms of tax. They don't pay any tax in terms of EFL bills, and all other things are there, right? So that is a help for those people. That is caring in a way. That is caring from a shrewd economics point of view, and it's taking in a care like that. From the socialist side, yes, more can be done, more engagement and lots of other things trying to promote. I think some of the things like SASI and other NGOs are giving, all those things available can come in. But from the top, from the shrewd economic point of view, I think that policy is there these people are, the small, and this is very, very good, should be. I mean, at the moment we're talking about pay cut and FNU and other places. I voiced very strongly and I said, let's on top take it, not at the bottom. Because the bottom are not very well paid anyway. So in other way, it is caring for the small people at the bottom. And it's happening to some extent. Maybe we should do more and bring it more closer to the mainline economy. Yeah.
Shashi, I saw you shake your head. You didn't agree with something there. Maybe you'd like to...
Yes, I think it's not completely true. I think there is a lot of policies, but it doesn't necessarily reach the grassroots. And right now, what does that $30,000 income bracket look like? Where two people might have been working on 20,000 each or 30,000 each, and either they both on reduced pay or both have lost the pay. I think the statistics have changed rapidly. And the so-called care of the lower income that's supposed to be there is not reaching the people. And that needs to be relooked at pretty quickly to see that those people are not pushed so far below poverty line we can't pick them up. So I think there's much more that needs to be done right now. If I can quickly add to something that Professor had said and you have said, I think the Governor had said, rural people and lack of savings. Now we know when our people pull kava out, for example, an acre, we're probably making $60,000 or taro. We have never paid enough attention, or banks haven't paid enough attention to the rural economy in that context. We think of them as a small rural savings scheme, but the investment portfolios are missing and the education on the ground is missing. If I sell my dalo for 60,000 today, most likely I'll spend the entire money in the next month. But there's not enough portfolios or not enough information of how people can put these in certain fixed portfolio which will give them returns. Because right now, with the urban economy collapsing, it's the rural economy that's doing the large taking care of.
Keeping things going, you would say, yeah? Next question, please.
Yeah, thank you. Panel, hi, my name is Professor Stephen Pratt. I'm the Acting Dean of Faculty of Business and Economics here at USP. I want to pick up the issue of diversification. So there's been some talk about the value of Yongona and exporting that as a viable alternative income source, given that on the world market, we need to have some unique selling point. We need to be different. And so I'd like opinions on the possibility of expanding that sector. And secondly, given also that Fiji has the comparative advantage in friendliness, friendly people and communities that was picked up earlier, to what extent can the call center business, there's already several businesses operating, but to what extent can that be extended further or further encouraged again to, in a sense, exporting our friendliness online or over the telecommunications to the rest of the world?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, diversification must be at the center of this reset in whatever way. I think if you look at diversification, you need to choose the ones that we have comparative advantage of, that we have strength. And you have mentioned a few of that strength. And you mentioned, was it cover? Yes. There's huge potential for that. And I think we're just starting to realize that. And you mentioned our friendliness. Yeah, that's our comparative advantage. But to broaden the base, we need some framework to broaden it. And that, unfortunately, comes back to government. Government must provide the infrastructure. It must provide the value chain, the supply chain, up to marketing. It must provide some capital and all those things. And I think, unfortunately, that has not happened up to now. Our sugar industry is declining. That's the fact. And government is heavily supporting the industry. But if you see the other support of government to other industries, including kava and other agricultural-based industry, is peanuts compared to sugar. So those kind of fundamental decisions needs to be made. Provide the infrastructure and the marketing and the so forth ammunition for that.
Thank you. Professor Vijay, you also mentioned diversification. If I can get you to have a quick response before we take the next question.
Thank you, Stanley. That was an excellent question, Stephen. We have a big diaspora abroad, thanks to the military coups that we have had in this country. And of course, the big elephant in the room in terms of cost cutting is a standing army of 3,500 personnel who take about $100 million each year. We haven't talked about that. Yeah? About rewinding, resetting. Do we need a military force? Yeah, that's caused this disruption in our society where the population abroad is as half as much as we have in this country. But the positive thing is that they provide a huge market for things Fijian. Primary product is kava. There are people selling kava for huge amounts of money right across California, along the west coast of Canada, and of course in Australia and New Zealand. It's a huge market. And in Europe, this market is there. So, and I don't think the production is keeping up. So we are importing Vanuatu kava to mix with the Fiji kava and pretend it's Fiji kava. So this is an important area for diversification. The other area that we have comparative advantage is marijuana. Marijuana is criminalized in Fiji, and the small people are being caught and sent to jail. Police spend a lot of time arresting them, uprooting these plants. It's growing so well. The resetting would be, well, how we can take advantage of this. Elsewhere, marijuana is being legalized, medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, and we can sell these, product from friendly Fiji, organically produced in places like Kandava, up in our mountain, and export this. See, I know that in the case of South Africa, from Natal province, there is this export under the radar to the US, and they have a particular name of the brand, and people look for that brand. So here are we in Fiji, destroying something that has a lot of potential. Clearly, we have to regulate, we have to be careful about what happens, but New Zealand is going down that path. Australia probably has, gone further down that path. So here's an opportunity that we can take on. I want to make a quick comment about what Racheli asked about and what Ram commented on, about the sense of community and social capital that people are relying on to sustain them at this time. So as Ram said, sometimes when you rely on too much on market forces, the social solidarity, the sense of community can be seriously undermined. And this has happened in many countries of the world. But if we are able to enhance the sense of community, the importance of the community is based on reciprocity. So that's a traditional value. So you give, and those who give, they have mana, they have respect. And not those who just simply take and accumulate, which is part of the current system. So how do we able to change values that reflect our friendliness, our sense of compassion and caring? That's very important.
Well, we're certainly thinking outside the box here today with kava and marijuana, and it just made me think in terms of the care economy. I mean, the remittances is in many ways part of the care economy. That's part of the, it's the people sending it back to their families and their fellow villagers for projects. So there's that aspect that I think that we can explore. Time is of the essence. We're going to have another 10 to 15 minutes, and I will take the next question.
Thank you. I'm Elaitia Ravuai from the Fiji Sun. This afternoon, I just wanted to pick the minds of the panelists this afternoon, rather, on an idea that was provided by Governor Narumbe on an earlier show with you, Stan. This is in regards to an injection of $1 billion into the economy. I understand Mr. Narumbe had brought up in his 4 indicators, on the first one particularly, on the ease of economy. I just wanted the ideas of other panelists, and probably Mr. Narumbe at the end, you can highlight again on the $1 billion injection by government. Thank you.
Thank you. Would someone like to start? $1 billion injection from savings and printing of money. Right.
Thank you for the question. I mean, yes, I mean, you know, this is a crisis situation and we're trying to come out of it. We should not forget that. There's a lot of good things. Everything said today is very, very good. But we cannot do everything, must prioritize. We should know where we are. We're in a crisis, we're in a recession, the whole world is in recession. We have to come out first. We have to build ourselves to some strength first before we can do lots of things that we want. We want to do many things. So that's sort of a general comment there. Pumping sort of that kind of money in the economy, I tend to differ. From that, because what that will do, that will create too much expenditure. As it is, our economy being expenditure-driven economy for a long, long time. This is what I said in my presentation, that I would like to see this budget, money rather than giving as a handout to people, being plowed in through the budget and targeted, very, very strategized and targeted where it matters, so that we can restart, stimulate growth and restart those engines, the businesses, people, and then the flow-in effect will come. Remember, I mean, all this social responsibilities type thing is very, very important. I don't budge away from that for a minute. But to afford those things, we must have our economy in place. We must have businesses making profit. If business is making profit, social responsibility, they will deliver. But if they are crisis in themselves, they will not be able to deliver those sort of things. So I would like to see a strong budget coming out and really going and starting those businesses who are in trouble. Unemployment is high in Fiji and everywhere.
So that would be your...
That would be my contribution to come it from that way. Yeah.
Mr. Bajkal?
I have not really studied what that $1 billion injection would do to the economy. If you're looking at debt as a ratio of GDP, you are in a situation today where debt is climbing and GDP is coming down. So it's a two-way street, both of which are hurting. But the fact remains that I think in today's situation, a lot of countries have gone to 160, 150% of their GDP as debt. And I think what is helping is the lower cost of interest. So I'm not an economist. I really would not be able to predict what would happen. But it just looks like, something that it's in a situation where today we are facing the reality where some things might have to be let go of. And I'm not sure which is going to give. Thank you.
I would not comment on that directly, but what I do think needs to happen is there's a lot of focus and talk about helping businesses and small businesses and micro businesses. But we're not talking enough about the 120,000 highly skilled people who are innovators and who want to start businesses and there's no resource available for them. And I think there needs to be some level of injection in having some faith and belief in them and in trying to see how innovation could pump the economy back.
Mr. Narumbe, I'll come straight to you to...
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, we all realize it's unprecedented times. In unprecedented times, you need unprecedented solutions. You cannot go with the run-of-the-mill kind of solutions. And we talk about priorities. And to me, the priorities are 140,000 people that are suffering. That must be one of the priorities. Trickle-down economy in economics may happen, but that will happen through a process of spending. When this money is spent, it ultimately ends up with businesses. So, to me, a lot of countries have gone down this road of welfare payments or support payments to affected workers. Many, many countries. So for Fiji, if we are then saying to the workers, you go and get your life savings from FNPF, we'll concentrate on something else. That's not right, morally, to me, ethically. That's not right. Our government's supposed to be looking after the people, the taxpayers that have supported them over the years, over revenue. So to me, there must be a balance. There must be sharing of the burden of this. And that's why I propose that. 1 billion is based on about 8% of GNI, gross national income. So to me, that's the base of that. But that is the aim. The financing is what a lot of people focus about.
Yeah.
The financing. But let's keep the aim right in front of us. The financing, I've said, given the debt situation, the government finds to rechannel resetting its expenses to find that money. And I tell you, government has a lot of money that it can rechannel for.
So you see that as a short-term solution to
Yeah,
ease
that's
the
a
burden.
short-term
Short-term solution, right?
Yeah.
We'll take, I'll take a question and then you can formulate your answer.
Nisam Bulavanaka, my name is Chovesa. I'm the country director for Fiji and Tuvalu based at APTC, the Australia Pacific Training Coalition. I've got two questions, but before I go into that, I was quite excited when Sashi started talking about this issue of the cash economy and the fact that a lot of our rural people, our villagers, Itauke, for example, struggle with savings, and it's something that we've been talking about over the years. And I was beginning to think about our aunties, our nanas, and our bumbus in the village, that when somebody dies, all of a sudden there's a mat or a piece of tapa that comes out of underneath the bedroom of the katokao, which to me demonstrate that there is probably some aspect of saving that is being practiced in our villages and in the communities that we can probably bring into the front of skills development around managing resources and that sort of thing. And also I think points to the fact that Rachieli had just talked about around our traditional currency, the cultural intelligence that needs to be considered when we are talking about what Professor Vijayu was referring to as a holistic approach or multi-sectorial approach or multi-intersectorial approach. And these are the words that you often hear when you first land on the development stage, for example. My question is around how do we then begin to tweak our understanding of this holistic approach, taking into consideration all these issues that have been raised and the fact that COVID-19 has shifted not only from the health sector, that it's not just about the disease, but it has become this development issue that we need to address. How do we tweak our holistic approach to reflect that understanding? That's one. And the second question is around the tracking on the percentage that Mr. Narumbe had mentioned around the fact that 60% of the work is in the informal sector. Around 140,000 people have lost their jobs. And apart from that, there are many more thousand people who are struggling economically anyway. How do we prioritize skills development to reflect the fact that majority or the biggest opportunity sits in the informal sector or in infrastructure at a time when we are wanting to also make sure that there is food security and people are getting the basic needs that they have to meet at this point in time.
All right, thank you for the question. Vijay.
I'm not very certain about the first set of questions, the first question you had, but what I was going to say, Stanley, was to respond to Savanada Narumbe's idea of this $1 billion injection, and maybe tangentially I'll be able to respond to you. So I support this idea of the $1 billion injection, and from my viewing of Stanley at Simpson at 8, conversations that you had with the former governor of the Reserve Bank, what I heard was that half of it will come from reducing costs. And as he has said now, government has a lot of expenses. So how do we reduce the expenses? Yeah, right across the board. And I would suggest that we begin with our parliament and say to the MPs and ministers that at the moment with a 20% reduction in the emoluments, that's nowhere near filling the pinch of the people whom they are representing. So I would suggest, for a starter, a 50% cut. That's a reset at this current time of crisis where hundreds of thousands of people are suffering. Yeah? So that's one cut. I mentioned the military. And there are also a lot of other kinds of expenditures that can be looked at, and also the quality of expenditure. You drive around in Suva and look at all the blooming potholes on the roads. And the other day I saw them throwing some gravel onto these potholes. They're not even fixing it properly. So this is outsourcing, subcontracting. And what is the quality of your investment? So, cross-cutting, that's very important. There's a large informal sector, that is true. And when you talk about research that has been done, it has been largely oriented towards commercial agriculture. Have you looked at different types of things that people are producing in the semi-subsistence agriculture? Research these to increase the productivity of agriculture.
Okay.
That's very important. And the final point, that I wanted to make in response to that question is that in a research that Dr. Mahendra Reddy and I did some years ago, we found that people of other minority communities, especially Indo-Fijians, saved. They put their money in the bank. They tried to be very thrifty. And of course, part of the thrift is not giving your money away for too many social causes. You have a smaller kinship network. In the case of indigenous Fijians, there was a contrary practice. Those who had tended to share. So just about all middle-class ethnic Fijian families had other relatives staying with them, going to school or just hanging around. And they gave to various solis all the time. But in building that social relationship and solidarity, when any individual or a particular family had a langa, had a problem, had a crisis, then the others stepped in, And even with very small amounts of money, they'd put out some money towards something for a future end. So if there's a wedding occurring, they'll let you know. Can you raise money? If there's 100 night following a funeral, they'll let you know. So Matangali members will collect. They met their handicrafts, their whatever savings plus cash towards that end. And I think that's a very, very good thing. And
taking a new perspective towards that.
Yeah.
We are running out of time, so in this last 5 minutes, I'd give all the panelists a minute each to make their final points. A lot's been said, a lot of the ideas, but this is the first of 8 series that we're going to be conducting, and there'll be a lot of opportunity to expand. I think this has started off the discussions, initiated a lot of the discussions that a lot of people will be talking about, and I think we'll be relooking, we'll be resetting and rewinding, the new word that we've been introduced with as a concept today, to look at how we reset for a resilient economy. I'd like to start from the left. Dr. Kishore can give his summing up and final points.
Thank you, Stanley. Thank you. Yes, as I said, there's a lot of issues and there's a lot of real pain, no doubt about it. But again, I go back where I started. I think we have to get our house in order, which is the economic house in order. Once we have the economy going, the flow and effect will be there and will fix a lot of problems. It has been over the time, right? So we really need to. I think it's critical that this budget focuses on growing the economy and focuses on businesses to drive this economy, private sector. They've been talked about over expenditure. Yes, I think it will be looked at. It has already been started to look at, and it will be looked at more so, and that will help. And this expenditure, like Rambajikal said, not only in public sector, it has been looked at all across private sectors as well. I think private sectors, businesses, some of the businesses need education as well. If you look at the way they're expanding, I mean, you see that there's no revenue there, and they keep on building expenditure and sorrows. So just to sum up, I think we have to get our economy in order, and all these small places, small things that's in a social economy will fall in place. We cannot start with social economy. We must get the economic economy in order, and all these social economies then can be afforded. Thank you.
Mr. Rambajikal.
In the process of the reset, I would say that if you look around and we see who's going through what at this point in time, the more affluent countries, the industrialized nations who have had lots of money in their pockets have been able to support their people, whereas those countries which had less money in the bank have been struggling to support their people. I think the same thing goes within a country. Those that have money in the bank have probably been able to withstand this much better than those that have not had money. So what this really highlights to me is social inequities and income diversity. And I think that's one of the things that in the reset I would like to see happen. A lot more social justice. I would like to see a lot more equity brought about, and the diversity or the disparity in incomes reduced. Because I think, if anything, the COVID has taught us that it's a great leveler, and pandemics are great levelers. Till every one of us is all right, none of us is safe. And I think, therefore, the reset must take into account getting everybody safe, which means income as well, not just health-wise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think for traditional skills, I think in terms of food security and in terms of being able to give us new ideas, traditional skills needs to be mainstreamed. Food preservation for food security. Commodities have been mentioned, kava. I'll add to it turmeric, sea salt, seaweed, looking at our land and sea resources and seeing how that can be made into commodities both for food security and for external purposes, masi and things. I think the investment in rural economy, each time people have been harvesting, we have not been providing them the financial support to be able to make that into an economy, because rural economy is what's saving us and what has potential to save us right now. And finally, I would like to ask everybody to have faith in the so-called unemployed people right now. If we have 120,000, 140,000 people out there, they're not just unemployed, they're human capital, they're highly skilled. If we can allow resources for new innovations, if we can give them a break to pick themselves up, if we can be humane in the way we deal with this reset, I think the country will see some really good new innovations going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just have 3 final comments. The first, I think you need to reassure the people you need to quieten that anxiety. And I think they need to see a clear way forward. I think we need to be realistic and chart that way forward on that realism. The second is that we must prioritize. We don't have sufficient resources. Some of these things will take time. Some of those things may need to be done later. What needs to come in first? So prioritization to me is clear that we need to do. And lastly, we need to learn from the past. We cannot move forward without learning from the past. We have done some very silly things in the past. Let's learn from that. And that's how we reset or rewind the economy, that you learn from the past. Thank you.
Professor Vijay Naidu.
Thank you very much, Stanley. I really appreciate the diversity of views that we had in this panel discussion. I'd like to say something about social inequality and the importance of community. In today's world, thanks to the extreme amounts of deregulation and marketization, inequality has increased. And again, the Central Bank of India head, who used to be the IMF's chief economist, has commented on this matter as well. Currently, about 36 trillion US dollars are hidden in tax havens. 36 trillion US dollars have evaded any kind of taxation because the wealthy and the corporates are hiding this money. Money that should go back to the communities that made it possible, some of it as a redistributive mechanism. So that is replicated in many developing countries and even here in Fiji. So I support the idea of redistribution, and I believe in government taking its responsibility about taxing people seriously so that there is redistribution and you pay as you earn. Yeah? First. The second point, I just want to reinforce the sense of community and the importance of food security and linking the semi-subsistence to the cash sector. People have written about the fact when the tourism sector was booming, there was insufficient linkages between tourism and our own agriculture. And we kept importing, from abroad because irregularity of supplies, the quality of supplies. So we need to look at that. And just as we talked about import substitution industrialization, which is now regarded as old-fashioned, I would like to talk also about, in the vein that I think Sashi has said, import substitution agriculture. For God's sake, we are importing chicken, we are importing fish, we are importing pork, beef, and goat meat. All these things can be produced here, quite apart from beverages and other foodstuffs. So if we are able to put money in the rural economy, create an enabling environment, who knows? For the longer term, we'd have food security, but also save some money by cutting down the import of things that we have comparative advantage in.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our panelists for today. That brings our first Reset series discussions to a close. A big thanks to Rohit Kishore, to Ram Bajkal, to Shashi Kiran, Mr. Narumbe, Professor Vijay Naidu, and big thanks to the audience, a big thanks to our partners. Our next series will be on agriculture, and that will be coming in the following week, but from the USP campus here at Laucala in Suva. Goodbye for now.